Now, today we're talking about the Nile River Valley. This is chapter 5, section 1. We discussed earlier at the beginning of term 2 that the ancient civilizations started in the Fertile Crescent. We said that the first civilization to start was Mesopotamia, and we discussed the empires that started and declined inside the Mesopotamian Empire. This was part 1. Part 2, in another place, which is the Nile River Valley, was another empire arising. This empire was divided first into two sections. Yani Egypt first was divided into southern Egypt and Kush before it becomes all one big country or one big empire. Today's empire, the location is Africa. Remember, Mesopotamian empires were located in grade 11. This is me asking you. The
Asia.
Mesopotamian empire was located where? Iraq and Iran.
Asia.
Fin?
Fertile Crescent.
Asia.
Asia. Yes, thank you. The first empire started in Asia. The second empire, which is Egypt and Kush, started in Africa. The area around, or the area that includes the empire, was known as the Nile River Valley. The Nile River Valley was ideal or was suitable for people to settle there. Why? Because of the fertile land. If I ask you, why is the land fertile in the Nile River Valley, what would your answer be? Grade 11.
ما هو عشان النايل.
Exactly. So why aren't you answering? It's as simple as that.
تمام.
Okay. Now, when the hunters and gatherers arrived in the area of the Nile River Valley, it was around 5000 BC. They started building settlements around the Nile River, which is the green area that is highlighted. This is where they started settling. These people were known as the Kushites. So the early Egyptians who arrived and settled around the Nile River were known as the Kushites. Okay? Early Egyptians, they lived in the northern region of the Nile River Valley. They called the land Kemet. Kemet means black land. Okay, why? Because it had dark, very rich soil. Because the Nile River the water was very strong and the water brought silt from the cataracts and it was very fertile. The color was dark. The darker the soil, it means the richer it is or the more fertile it is. The northern Nile area will be later on called Egypt. So they settled here in this part around the Nile River to the north, and later on they will call it Egypt. Now, the weather of Egypt, Egypt has a hot and dry climate, as you all know. This is why many of the temples and the structures was able to survive up until today because there is no strong humidity. Now, since the region received little rainfall, Egyptians depended on the Nile River as a source of farming, drinking, and bathing. They had only the Nile River to use as a source of water. Now, for the Nile River, it was the world's longest river. You need to know that it flowed for about 4,000 miles from Central Africa to the Mediterranean Sea. I can ask you two questions about the Nile River. How long is it? So you're going to say 4,000 miles. Or How long does it stretch? How long does it stretch? You're going to say that it flows or it stretches north from Central Africa to the Mediterranean Sea. Now, the Nile River, as many of you might not know, or maybe you do, originally starts as two rivers. Yani it starts in Central Africa at the part of Sudan. The Nile River starts as two separate rivers, the Blue Nile and the White Nile. They go along in two separate different ways, and then they join at the south of Egypt, forming one path. So the Nile River starts as two separate paths or two separate rows, and then at the south of Egypt, it joins to becomes one river. The spot where the river meets together is called cataract. You can find it in Aswan. This is where they built the dam. The dam is built because the two rivers, the Blue River and the White River, join together, forming what you can see here known as cataracts, fast-moving water. Any questions so far?
Yes.
Do you all understand?
I think I saw that.
Yes.
Okay. Now, because the Nile River started flowing, it started carving courses through the land. By time, the Nile created a valley. By valley, it means the water is running through the same certain path, creating a path for it. Around this water path is very deep, rich, fertile soil, and the land is suitable for living. So this is why they call it the Nile River Valley. Before the Nile reaches the Mediterranean Sea, it splits into many branches. So the Nile River starts from the very bottom, from the south of Egypt. It starts as two separate rivers, the Blue River on one path and the White River on another path. They go in two separate different ways, and then they join in one spot at south of Egypt, forming the cataracts. And then the Nile River continues through all of Egypt until it reaches a point at north of Egypt where it makes a fan shape around the land. Okay, it splits into many branches, okay, that resembles either a fan or a plant bloom. This shape, the one in front of you. These waterways, they make the land more fertile than the one stream, and it's known as the delta. Okay, around Egypt, the whole area is desert except for the Nile River Valley. Do you understand the geography of the Nile River Valley?
I understand.
Now, talking more about the geography of Egypt or the Nile River Valley itself. To the west of the area of the Nile River Valley is the Saharan Desert. Remember the same thing that we did with the Mesopotamian Empire. We discussed the map and we said that we need to know all the geographical landforms or water bodies from the north, the south, the east, and the west. So from the north, it's the Mediterranean Sea. Okay? From the west, it's the Libyan Desert, or part of it is known as the Sahara. So you need to know the two names, the Libyan Desert and the Sahara. To the east is the Eastern Desert. Okay? Because it's surrounded from three sides by the desert, it was not favorable to both humans and animals. They were stuck. The animals and humans who lived in the Nile River Valley couldn't really travel through the long areas of the deserts. This was one advantage, but one disadvantage. But the one advantage was that this wide or vast piece of desert from both sides, the east and the west, stretching even to the south, isolated Egypt from the rest of the world, which therefore isolated the invaders or the attackers. So far, is it clear? Now, the second physical feature other than the desert that protected Egypt was the cataracts. Remember when we said at the south, when the two rivers meet, the blue and the white rivers meet, they formed the cataracts. So the cataracts protected Egypt from the south, the Libyan or the Saharan desert from the west, the Eastern desert from the east, and the Mediterranean Sea from the north. So Egypt was like an island isolated from the rest of the world. Give me a second. So I can ask you either state why Egypt was geographically isolated, or state the advantages of Egypt being geographically isolated, or state how Egypt is geographically isolated. Now, in the north, in the delta marshes stopped the invaders sailing from the Mediterranean Sea. What are marshes? These are marshes اللي هي plants or water plants that grow in shallow water. Okay? So even if they wanted to pass the Mediterranean and they have their ships, the big ships could not sail through the shallow waters of the delta, and because of the marshes, the ships would not move. The deserts, the cataracts, and the delta marshes gave the Egyptians the advantage that the Mesopotamian people lacked. Mesopotamia was exposed. It had no features to protect it. This is the opposite for the Egyptians. They had all the features, the physical features to protect them. But the Egyptians were not cut off from trade because they used wind patterns to sail the boats and to trade with other regions. They found ways to sail only them from Egypt to the other nearby lands so that they can start trading. Now, remember when we said that the Mesopotamian rivers were flooded, the Tigris and the Euphrates, and because these floodings, without them, the land would die, and with them, it would destroy the houses and the soil. Egypt's floodings were seasonal, the same as Mesopotamians. But they did not face the same challenges. Why? Because they had large pieces of land. They had the desert. The floodings were not as heavy as the Mesopotamian floodings. Now, each year during late spring or at the end of spring, heavy tropical rains would fall in Central Africa, not in Egypt. Okay? So each year at the end of spring, before winter shows up, heavy tropical rains would start in Central Africa, as well as snow that starts to melt from the mountains in East Africa. These two things, the heavy tropical rains and the melting of the snow, causes the Nile to overflow or overflood. Okay, the Nile has a certain level of water. Remember, we said that there are two Niles, the blue and the white. They have certain water. When it's the end of spring, excess water shows, which is in the form of tropical rains. These rains are very heavy to the point that it adds a lot of water to the Nile. It's just like having a full cup of water and you start to pour water from a jar in this full cup. Okay, what happens is the water starts to overflow. When the water returns to the normal level and the period of the late spring is over, thick deposits of fertile soil remained. Just like the floodings that happened in Mesopotamia, the floodings that happens in Egypt also brings deposits of fertile soil and it stays. Who can remind me? The fertile soil remains. What do we call it? Grade 11.
Silt.
Yes, silt. Thank you. This is where we're going to stop today. And next week, we're going to continue how did they start their activities. So far today, we discussed the location of the Second Empire, which is the Egyptian Empire. We discussed the location on the map. Where is it? What's on the north? What's on the south? What's on the east? What's on the west? Going into details geographically, we discussed the Nile River and where does it start? Where does it end? And how is it divided in the middle into two rivers? We also discussed the geographical features that happen starting from the floodings to the seasonal rain and the overflowing. For today's part, do you have any questions?
No, Miss.
Okay, enjoy your long weekend. Tedros, happy feast, and please do not forget to submit the project on time.
Okay, Miss.
Okay?
Okay,
You can leave. I'll see you on Sunday.
okay, Miss.
Remember, Sunday is going to be the presentation, so please do not miss the session.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So.